Okay. Is everybody good? Okay, I think we have everyone. Okay. Hi, my name is Kira Chatwin. I'll be the first speaker for the affirmative from Los Altos Mountain View in today's debate. For just a brief off-time roadmap, I will be going over, I guess, the resolution and then 3 contentions and then a brief underview. And if you have POIs, please just ask verbally. My audio and Zoom and stuff are being very weird lately, so if I don't respond, it's not because I'm trying to ignore you, it's just because my tech is breaking. So please feel free to just ask again. Okay. 7 minutes. Anybody not ready? My time will begin now. I strongly affirm the resolution that on balance, the present condition of humanity in 2023 is preferable to its condition in 2050. Now, just for a brief bit of resolutional analysis, indicated by this resolution being a statement, this is going to be a fact round, which means that we're trying to prove that this statement is true, whereas the negative is trying to prove that this statement is false. That means that you ought to be weighing this round on preponderance of evidence, or whoever can show that their side is most true in terms of doing things such as adding warrants, analytics, and logic overall. I think that should be pretty simple, and I'm not sure there's anything much to clarify about the resolution. It's pretty straightforward. So unless anyone has any questions, I'm going to jump right into our first contention, which is that of the environment. The first thing we see happening right now is that the environment is escalating towards climate change without end. It is that in a 2018 IPCC report, scientists warned that even at just 1.5 degrees Celsius, temperature increases would be unevenly distributed globally and reach devastating 4.5 degrees Celsius in the Arctic, with profound consequences on the entire planet, because the Arctic is essentially a huge greenhouse gas emissions sink, which means that once it reaches this critical warming state, we see that all of this ice melts away because there's currently a huge methane bubble underneath the Arctic. Once that is unleashed, there's essentially no return from climate change. So you see that even at 1.5 degree levels, we see that we would be devastated due to the results of this. But the second thing here is simply that current human efforts are getting nowhere near success. A is that this is going to be devastating. 0 countries are currently on target to meet the IPCC goals. Again, the IPCC goals, judges, are 1.5 degrees Celsius. At the point where even 1.5 degrees Celsius would be devastating, and we aren't even getting close to meeting those, we see that we're probably doomed to climate change. But B is that we see this is only going to increase in the future because consumption requires increasing amounts of fossil fuels, which means more mining, which means more carbon dioxide and more emissions, which is only going to exacerbate the problem. We tell you that the impacts are going to be very, very severe. The first impact we're going to see is displacement. The World Bank predicts as many as 140 million people could be displaced by 2050. By 2050, already over 100 million people are going to be displaced, which is a very significant impact. But second of all, we see that air quality is going to be exacerbated. A USC report found that skies by 2050 could revert to the smog of the 1970s before anything such as the Clean Air Act was implemented, leading to millions of lives lost due to things such as air pollution. Third is that of food insecurity. We see that a Nature article found food insecurity could increase by up to 30% due to climate change's impacts on ruining things such as crops, etc., which means that people simply aren't going to have enough food to put on the table. Fourth is that of pandemics. Current researchers estimate the probability of having a pandemic in one's lifetime is about 38%. This is expected to triple within the coming decades due to the proliferation of things such as factory farms, climate change leading to increases in vector-borne disease, etc. We see that this is a huge impact, Judge. There's now over a 100% probability that someone will have a massive pandemic, the scale of COVID-19, in their lifetime. Judge, this is a massive impact that's probably going to outweigh anything else. But fifth is we see that this disproportionately affects minorities. These are the most likely to be affected or displaced when we see that, for example, the impacts of climate change come in, because they're more likely to be situated in areas that are prone to things such as pollution, etc. Now let's go into our second contention, which is that of social movements. The first thing we see here is that over time, hegemonic structures are becoming increasingly effective at striking down social and liberatory movements. It is that you can look to union busting as a great example for this. Right to work laws spreading in the US as time goes by and unionization steadily declining only illustrates a trend towards the negative in the future. Because that of technological advance, over time, governments and producers that exert control over the economy increasingly gain a monetary and technological advance over the people of a nation. I.e., if I wanted to fight back against the government, it becomes increasingly likely that the government will have no trouble throwing me in prison. And C is that of authoritarianism. The rise of surveillance technologies is also leading to the infiltration of privacy rights of the public through vehicles such as the NSA. With technological development, we tell you this only gets more egregious. The second thing we see happening is the rise of authoritarianism. Western aggression has created authoritarian governments, meaning countries that suppress the voices would only increasingly crack down on repression and limit sustained global social movements. A is that of multipolarity. The US is losing the stage as an international actor, or like the leading international actor, leading to competitions from other nations such as China and Russia, increasingly able to assert their control and prop up things such as like authoritarianism across the world, which is only exacerbating these impacts. Because that this not only leads to the increasing authoritarian restriction of civil rights, it also leads to things such as proxy conflicts and polarization across nations that increases the likelihood that nations go to war. You can look to the conflict between India and Pakistan as a clear example in which like multipolarity and like proxy conflict, one nation being influenced by the US, one nation being influenced by China, only increases the likelihood that tensions erupt. Third is we see that domestic polarization also kills local, like domestic ability to coalition build. A Zeta Brown study finds that polarization is only on a rise now, especially in large nations such as the US, which is making things such as unified policymaking increasingly difficult. Because that while right now basic things such as like maybe small improvements in like infrastructure and civil liberties can be agreed on, we see that increasing polarity is only going to lead to blocks that are going to prevent us from passing anything. For example, like civil liberties bills or any sort of gridlock is going to like essentially constrict Congress in the future from being able to do anything. The impact of this is probably just going to be human rights and being able to, as well as conflict, because we see that again, conflict is going to be significantly uplifted in the context of polarization. With that, our third contention is that of the economy. The first thing we see here is that AI usurpation is going to lead to significant job loss. A McKinsey Global Institute study found that half the work we do will be automated by the year 2055, which means that there's also a huge inequity here because the inequality of tech means that the most resources are able to access and adapt to the new like technical jobs that are going to require degrees, whereas those who are in jobs, for example, like truck driving, probably will lose their jobs first. The second thing we see here is wealth inequality, is that domestically, there's a significant amount of wealth inequality. And 73% of Americans say the gap between the rich and the poor is only going to continue to grow wider. Because that furthermore, we see that there's a sheer magnitude of lower wage competition, which means that we're probably going to stop interstate competition. The impacts of this is just going to be poverty and a declining economy. Now let's go to a quick underview, which I guess is going to be framework. The role of the ballot is to determine, I guess, the truth of the resolution. A couple of reasons why we should do this. First is that of advocacy, weigh the resolution as a material heuristic for our method. It's a logical reflection of our scholarship. The second thing we'd like to see is that of complexity, be skeptical of sweeping root causes. The resolution is a confluence of different factors, events, and systems. Particularisms avoid dogmatic repetition decisions. Third is that of demands. People who are systematically excluded from the space need to be able to interrogate the space to make demands on it and make safe spaces for themselves. And fourth is that the space amplifies voices. Having a setting where you get set times, the ability to reject POIs and control your own speech ensures that debate can be a place where everyone is forced to listen to the voices of everyone else, which uniquely allows for a good quality of education. For all of those reasons and more, I strongly urge an affirmation vote.
Fantastic. Cool. If it's okay with everybody, I'm just going to keep my camera off just because I'm still feeling a little bit unwell, if that's okay with everybody. Okay, so the order for the speech, I'm just going to be starting, like if it's okay with everybody, just an overview to talk about what our strategy is going to be in this round. And then one long off, and then I'll respond to everything that our opponents have said. Okay, cool. So for the off-time roadmap, and essentially, okay, here's the off-time roadmap. So, hi judges, I'm Abby, and this is Rihanna, and we're seniors. Our experience in debate has been riddled with pervasive misogyny and racism, and at the last tournament of our career, we wanted to propose a critique of patriarchy within debate. These critical arguments are going to be talking about sexual assault, violence, and suicide. So if these topics are not okay with y'all, just let me know and I will do my best to accommodate. And yeah, if you guys have any questions about the content of our K, just I think POCs are something that people are doing at this tournament, like points of clarification, so let me know and we're happy to explain anything in this K to y'all. Okay, cool. So if everybody is ready, my time will start now. Let's go first to the framework. Now, the framework is the basis for what we're critiquing in this round, and there's three key things to note. The first is that this tournament is key. Debate is where we learn to be engaged change makers, but we're constantly spoken over, demeaned with gendered slurs, sexualized, and forced to defend violence against gender minorities. We reject the affirmations discussion of ineffective resolutional action, or essentially like ineffective action, and propose a counter advocacy resistance strategy against the misogyny and violence that pushes gender minorities out of party debate. Two is that one is not born a woman. Gender is not a biological reality, but a social identity. The oppression non-men face is produced by historical conditions and our identity as others. Three is that critical understanding comes first. We're constantly fed media and knowledge produced by patriarchal institutions, which naturalizes gendered violence. The A is that we don't know what our real desires are under patriarchy. After New Zealand police officers passed the 2003 law that created loopholes to abuse sex workers, they wrote a study claiming that this policy was liberatory. This liberation rhetoric is constantly amplified by patriarchal media and shields the industry from criticism, even though 80% of sex workers say they wish to leave the industry but are unable to. Without analysis of feminist theory, we can't know the true impacts of the policy. Now, this brings me to the interpretations. The role of the ballot and judges, your role as judges, is to vote for the team that best increases gender minorities' access to the debate space. Here, essentially, that we present a world where the judges are voting between two models of debate. One is advocating for business as usual that debates fact resolutions and talks about how this is like going to somehow help our education, while the other advocates for a subversive way to challenge patriarchy in and outside of rounds and provide solutions to combating these problems. Now let's go to the links. The links here, the overview for the links is just essentially that we are not defending like the topic in the sense that we're trying to prove that this statement is false, but we are negating the affirmation in the sense that we want to prove that this topical debate is bad. And the reason why we believe this is that there is no way to assess the way, like what humanity is going to be like either now or later, because we see that this holistic analysis and grouping together humanity as this one big entity is inherently patriarchal. It preserves the power structures that push minorities to the edge of society, and also prioritizes the point of view of colonialist and imperialist nations. We see that, sorry, okay, cool. The second link is essentially talking about how my opponents are talking about this big problem in the future, like how things are going to get so much worse, and they give you three unique reasons why the future is going to be worse. However, they provide you no solution. This essentially proves that truth of the resolution doesn't matter and action does. Whatever like side can prove and do the best to like actually talk and like take action against these options that we are presented with, instead of just sitting around and talking about them, is probably uniquely key. The second link is about this, how the present condition right now is worse because we haven't won TOC with this, with these critical arguments. We see that this critique is inherently like going to change the debate space to make it more like accessible to gender minorities. And we see that this spillover happens as like the way that we think about like patriarchy within the debate space and outside of the debate space happens. We see that this impact only happens in the future after we win this round in this tournament. This essentially proves that the winning strategy in debate isn't policy or exclusionary Marxism or any of these kinds of things that really don't make a difference, but like a more inclusionary way of debating. Okay, the third link is essentially that the fact that they don't have a single impact on how gender minorities are being harmed in the status quo and how that harm will get worse, which shows that they mask the harms that minorities face. This links into the framing of the links where we prove that the grouping of humanity into this one entity is inherently harmful, to the point where the team advocating for the like future being worse is like perpetuating this like just this distinction. Okay. Rihanna, do you want me to read the present humanity link? No? Okay, cool. So let's move on to the impacts. Okay, so the impact is violence. We see that patriarchy is the internal link to violence. The A is that parliamentary debate protects and ignores rapists. The I is that in 2020, the UOP forensics director was exposed as a rapist and groomer. Despite this, the first in-person NPDA national tournament after COVID was hosted at a UOP. Secondly, we see that in response to an article detailing violent sexual abuse within the high school party debate space, former NPDL treasurer Everett Rutan said, "I don't think this has anything to do with us," in an NPDL board meeting. B is that the patriarchal state is unwilling and unable to protect gendered minorities. A 2005 Supreme Court case ruled that police have no obligation to prevent domestic violence, even in cases of proven repetitive abuse. C is that the liberal emphasis on choice turns current feminist resistance into shallow choice feminism, which defines any action taken by a woman as uniquely feminist and ignores racial, class, and ability-related nuances. Choice feminism tricks young girls into thinking that OnlyFans accounts or life-threatening plastic surgery is liberatory. Now, this brings me to the alternative, or our advocacy. Vote negative to endorse our community-based feminist struggle in the debate space. Now, there's 4 reasons why this alternative is key. The first is survival. We have to beat this critique to resist misogyny and normalize critical discussion of structural patriarchy in the biggest debate space we can access. The A is that this K is not the end, but the means. The Chicago Women's Liberation Union's Liberation School started by teaching gender minorities political theory courses and then began mobilizing them to protest at local policy meetings. The B is that the 2004 Louisville performance critiques made Parley receptive to non-traditional debate styles. Similarly, our advocacy makes feminist theory accessible, spotlights misogyny, and forces you to listen while fostering community by validating gender minorities' experiences. The I is that this is empirically successful. In our last round, we won that round in front of 2 judges who do not regularly judge cases, and an East Coast debater reached out to us and said that was awesome. Saying that they agree with us is evidence, it is evidence that our feminist epistemology is rupturing the debate space, and this is empirical proof that our method is effective and therefore must be rewarded with a ballot. Now let's go to the third point. The second point is footnoting. The perm co-ops and steals our original argumentation, making it an casual misogyny in debate. Yeah.
What does it mean? Like, what do we do after we do this movement? Like, what would it look like? Are we gonna like sit here and like talk about gender, or would it be like what would happen to the debate space?
Okay, so there's a couple things. So the first is like this idea that we are like checking back against the type of debate that perpetuates and acknowledges like the current patriarchal power structures as like inherent to our reality. But the second is like to normalize this kind of discussion about gender so we can wage more material strategies. This is what our CWLU warrant is talking about, and this is the way that we create like a more awareness within the debate space that translates out into material actions. Okay, sorry, just finishing up the third point. If you vote for the affirmative, you lose the spotlighting impact of our alt and footnote gender minorities experiences of violent misogyny. Okay, so let's move to the affirmation, and I'm going to start with like the bottom, like the role of the ballot at the bottom. Okay, so the biggest response to this is the fact that like we do not know our real desires under patriarchy. We do not know what is true or false without like deconstructing the systems of patriarchy that control the way that we produce knowledge. We see that there is no way that you can prioritize this role of the ballot. The judge, even if you don't believe this, you have to be prioritizing the fact that we should be focusing on like what is material action in this case. Here they talk about like how the resolution is a materialization of their like action, but to the point where they don't actually tell you what they're doing and how they're going to fix these problems. We see that they're probably not fulfilling our role of ballot either. Okay, at the very bottom, just like extend the fact that my opponents admit that like debate is the space that we have to do this, which proves that RK is uniquely key. Let's go to the first contention about environment. Again, just on the impacts level, just note the fact that they really don't like specifically mention like gender minorities. The only thing that they talk about is this idea that minorities are worse, but to the point where we see that climate change impacts disproportionately fall on gender minorities, especially these arguments about displacement and food insecurity. We see that this is probably supercharged, and if the people who are talking about this problem do not actually highlight specifically this impact that it has on gender minorities, we see that the future is probably going to be pretty bleak in terms of like a gender framing. On the second contention, just extend that solidarity is uniquely key, and it's the way that you resist like government crackdown and authoritarianism. This means that we can foster like more like collaborative ideology that actually also checks back against polarization. We see that that is also proving that our alt is uniquely key to changing a lot of these issues. We see that at the impacts level, we see that like they talk about like how policy is bad and doesn't solve, but just extend the fact that this is like the reason why we are reading this case, so that we can check back against this policy that is fundamentally rooted in patriarchal capitalism and thus is not able to solve. Okay, so for these reasons, you have to be voting neg. Thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Michelle. I'll be the second speaker on the affirmative, and today I'll see for the order of today's debate. I need to read an overview. Okay, I'll just go on the row of the ballot first. So the framework arguments my partner reads at the bottom of her speech, and then the affirmative in order, and then the neg in order. All right. Okay. All right. Time is the order clear to everyone? Okay. My timing is my first word.
First, judges, I want you to extend our role of the ballot to weigh the plan as a material heuristic for a method because it's a logical reflection of our scholarship. Now, their only responses here is that we can't evaluate knowledge because of the patriarchy, but I will argue that yes, you can. Judges do this every day. For example, I can guarantee you that everyone in this round agrees that racism is bad. So even though yes, the patriarchy exists, that doesn't mean we cannot make good decisions. Next, let's go on to reasons why, like specifically, you should be prioritizing our way of evaluating the ballot. And there are a couple of arguments I would like you to extend here. Firstly is the argument about demands. We tell you that people who are systemically excluded from the space need to be able to interrogate the debate space to make demands on it and make safe spaces for themselves. This is inherently also one of a potential, like in other words, policymaking or debating of policymaking is a viable survival strategy for minority voices and gender minorities too. Secondly, we tell you that this means that this space amplifies voices. Having a setting where you get set times, the ability to reject POIs and control your speech ensures that the debate can be a place where men, or this probably means that like especially like in the debate space, like letting like non-men or gender minorities be able to defend a policy advocacy as a way of themselves finding their voice and like of voicing their opinions is probably very valuable, which is why you should be probably weighing probably evaluating the ballot based on like the evaluating the ballot based on plan. Let's go on to the affirmative arguments. The entirety of the case goes pretty much completely conceded, but let's go into our first argument about specifically the environment. We tell you that right now, or in the near future in 2050, we tell you that the climate change is inevitably going to worsen. This means that there's going to be more displacement, more pollution, which means that there's going to be like a decrease in quality of life and also increase in like death. And this ultimately is going to affect minorities the most. They tell you that we don't specify gender minorities. However, we will argue that even in the world patriarchy, there's also like other systemic influences that also like we shouldn't just say like, okay, gender minority specifically, but also like deny racial minorities, given the fact that like all minorities or people who are oppressed under these systems like do experience these impacts, these harmful impacts of environments like are disproportionately affected by environmental harms in the future. The next contention I want you to extend is the social movements argument. Now we argue that this entire argument probably proves how like gender minorities are able to have a voice, given the fact that we tell you that in 2050, the conditions for gender minorities and minorities as a whole are probably going to worsen, given the fact that when there is a multipolar system, this means that you have other nations who might not hold the same feminist ideals to be able to increasingly able to assert and control proper authoritarianism. Do I need to go on the econ? Okay, let's go on to, and also go on to the economy argument. We tell you that the increasing of AI usurpation means that wealth inequality is going to increase, and this probably directly affects like disproportionately affects disadvantaged minorities. Let's go on to the negation. The overview to their argument is that we deserve to survive. Now, Kira and I are both non-men, but we want to. And we will argue that we also deserve to survive in the way that we want to survive, forcing non-men to adopt your strategy specifically and only your strategy system and us of agency. And I, as a woman, do not want to sit here and talk about how I am oppressed every second of the round. Does that mean I don't deserve to be in the debate space? I argue no. Let's go into the framework. We agree to all of their arguments. We argue that yes, gender is a social identity. We argue that yes, historical conditions shape like who we think we are. This is exactly why the analysis of today's material conditions of both the present and the future under the affirmative is key to see where gender is going to go in the future and how our place in the patriarchy is going to affect how we experience or have experience and face those future challenges. They talk about how second argument they make here is that we should the role of the ballot is to vote for a team that best increases gender minorities access to the space. They can function under all role of the ballot as well as the most inclusive, given the fact that you're allowing both the neg and the affirmative of voice. Probably means that like their interpretation can also function under our interpretation of what you as a judge should be voting on. But let's go into their links now. They give you a couple of links here about, firstly, they tell you that we're not defending the topic. I have 3 reasons why defending the topic is going to be good. Firstly, extends the fact that it allows us to interrogate the status quo, which is critical to building effective movements against it, which was the framework argument. They say that we have to do something about it, but you can't do anything about it if you don't understand what's going on. Secondly, it is my survival strategy, and that is worth something. Maybe it's my survival strategy to be talking about why suffering in 2050 is going to be far worse than conditions now. Thirdly, it's a good way to analyze the effect on gendered movements. The neg could have come up here and read you that it is the most important thing. The neg came up here and read you that it's the most important thing to prioritize its gendered impacts, and said that gender movements are going to do better in the future to defend, I guess, to uphold to uplift gender minority voices, but they didn't, which is probably indicative of the fact that like there's other ways to engage with the round that are also able to resolve their harms. Then they talk about how holistic analysis is important. Turn this, we specifically refer to social movements and minorities in the affirmative. Secondly, to tell you that we talk about a big problem in the future. Again, you can't take action if you don't know the problem. Thirdly, they tell you that present conditions is worse because we can't have one TOC with the term. We say that it's equally powerful to affirm that non-men can win rounds defending whatever they want. They say that there's no links of why gender minorities are harmed. 2 responses. Number 1 is that this is a link of omission, and secondly, we did read implications to both social movements and minorities in our contentions. Then let's go into the impacts. They talk about impacts of violence and also just the ignoring of like other intersections. First, okay, let's go into the advocacy. First argument here is the permutation. The biggest disadvantage to not doing the permutation is that reading policy can also be do the AF and then also endorse our community-based feminist struggle in the debate space. The biggest disadvantage to not doing the perm is the fact that reading policy can also be a survival strategy. It's counterproductive to deny us as non-men our agency. If they call all policy making bad, that means we just sit around and talk about gender, but people don't always want to talk about their oppression. This leads to forced outing and discussions that make people miserable. But furthermore, debate is not but furthermore, their politics collapse back into liberalism, as proven by the foundational war of decay, the Chicago Women's Liberation Union collapsing into liberal her story education campaigns in the modern day. Educational campaigns are great, but they don't solve the fact that there are structural patriarchal issues, as my opponents agree. Next, the perm isn't footnoting. We argue that we can talk, we can both walk and chew gum. That doesn't mean that they're like mutually exclusive. It probably means that like
actively advocate.
And also in our plan, we also advocate like for the voices of gender minorities. And okay, let's go on.
Wait.
Next, I would like to just go over a few reasons why their movement is probably not a good thing independently. First is co-option. We argue that feminism is generally found to be a rallying point for any sort of for all sorts of exclusionary politics. For example, anti-trans feminists are quite common, which means that you might lead to conservative co-option. Secondly, is that there is a safe harbor for exclusionary feminists. Even if the movement isn't started by exclusionary feminists, it can too easily be co-opted and taken in that direction. This probably leads to movement fracturing, which means that like trans might manifest in a way that manifest in a way where trans exclusionary feminists have teamed up with conservatives, for example, in passing legislation that hurt non-men and prevents them from filing gender discrimination statements and etc.
Okay, Slay. All right, so the order for the speech, I'm going to start with kind of an overview statement on top, and then going to cover the AF. I'll go on the like roll of the ballot arguments first, and then I'll cover the AF case, just probably in order. And then I'm going to do the neg, and that order is going to be framework, links, impact, all. Okay. Is everyone ready? My time will start in 3, 2, 1. Judges, at the end of the day, our opponents are not proposing an advocacy strategy. They don't give you a plan text. They're not even engaging in policy debate as they claim that they are. They're just defending the fact of resolution. They're just sitting there and telling you about the bad things that are happening in the world right now. Every single argument that our opponents make to you about how it's bad for us to sit here and talk about gender without like really changing anything is probably just going to be cross-applied to their side because they're not giving you any kind of advocacy. They basically reach you all these reasons that the world is bad right now and getting worse, and then don't tell you how to fix it. For that reason, judges, you're going to see that our strategy is the only thing that's actually providing you with something good. But overall, what you're weighing this round off of is basically the two worlds of debate. We're both providing you with a different way to actually look at parliamentary debate. In the world of our opponents, they propose that we should discuss fact resolutions, right? We should say that a fact resolution is true or not true, propose a bunch of evidence to prove whether or not it's true, and then kind of just go about our day after. What our world of debate is, judges, is we provide you with a critical argument that tells you that just discussing whether or not the world is good or bad does not change anything. On the contrary, discussing how we can fix the world is the best way to utilize the debate space. Because as my partner Abby excellently explains to, debate is where we create informed and good change makers. For that reason, you're going to be voting for us on the idea that we have a better model of debate, a better way to debate this round, and a better way to actually increase access for gender minorities. With that, let's cover the framework debate. So on the affirmation role of the ballot sheet, they respond to our my partner's really excellent argument about how we don't know our own desires by telling you that judges judge things every day. Like we all know that racism is bad, this kind of stuff. They're not engaging judge with the meat of this argument, which is telling you that right now, capitalist patriarchy controls how we view the world. In other ways, New Zealand police officers were able to actually control the way that the public viewed the sex trade by telling the public that the expansion of the sex trade was liberatory. This is just one out of many examples, judges, of the way that capitalist patriarchy controls our mindset and the way that we look at the world. Another example is probably just Instagram, right? TikTok, the way that it controls the way that gender minorities view their bodies and their opinions and their ideology. These are all examples of how capitalist patriarchy controls how we view our own desires and our own subjectivities. For that reason, you're going to find that patriarchy controls any kind of argument that they make to you about the truth of the resolution. In other words, our critique is a prerequisite to even voting for their role of the ballot, because only by knowing whether or not we know our desire, yeah, I'll take it.
Does the patriarchy change whether climate change is going to displace 140 million people?
Right. We say that the actual role of the ballot, like setting the norm that we should be debating whether or not the truth of the resolution is true, doesn't make sense in a world in which the patriarchy controls whether or not we understand how climate change affects us. In other words, all the warnings that they're giving to you might be true, might not be true. But because patriarchy is controlling the way that we actually perceive those warnings and hear them and look at their impacts, you're going to be voting for us on this argument that they're not really looking at the way that patriarchy specifically affects the way that climate change is felt by individuals. Okay. On their argumentation, they talk to you about this demands thing. They say people need to make demands on the state to interrogate it. You can classify Abby's argument on the impacts level, where she tells you that the state in 2005 ruled in the Supreme Court that police didn't have the obligation to protect women from domestic violence, even in cases of proven abuse. This tells you that even though we've been doing debate for literally decades, right? Debate has existed for so long. You're going to see that, regardless of that, the state never listens to our demands. Feminist cases have been around for a while, but they've never been good enough to actually challenge the state, right? And so our feminist critique, by creating this critical interrogation of the way that patriarchy affects us, can actually change state policy. In other words, when they tell you that people need to make demands on the state in order to interrogate it, look to the fact that policy debate has been happening for so long, and yet the state continues to oppress us. Only a revolutionary strategy against that can work. And as we tell you, our critique, creating this rupture in the debate space that makes people more susceptible and more ready to listen to feminist rhetoric, is the only way to actually make material strategies like strikes, like unions, like safe houses. My partner Abby explains this pretty clearly, and that's another direct index to their entire role with the ballot. Finally, on the limits argument, we don't say debate is bad or reject debate. We agree that debate, as a format, is a good way to discuss different policy options and different political methodologies. What we tell you specifically is that your defense of a fact, the affirmation's defense of a factual statement and choice to defend the round as being true or false is a means of stopping us from actually engaging in good critical discussion. And beyond that, even if you believe that limits are important, you're going to buy that our critical discussion is better than their debate over whether or not the resolution is true or false. On the impact level, right, looking at the proximal impact in this round, the team that resolves gendered oppression and fixes the violence that we face in debate because the patriarchy on that level is probably going to be winning. So their role of the ballot on testing the truth of the resolution doesn't really matter, to the point where I've both proven to you that critical understanding comes first, right? Understanding the way that we view the world comes first, so that means our K comes first, and that the impact of proximal gendered violence is more important than testing the truth of the resolution. Because after we leave this round, what do we leave with? Not the truth of the resolution, Judge. We all know the world is burning down. What we need to do is figure out a strategy to combat that. Okay, on the case proper. First, in this environmental argument, you're going to extend Abby's argumentation that all these impacts of displacement and stuff get supercharged if we don't do anything to fix it. But you're also going to look to the fact that they just kind of read you a bunch of reasons why the world is bad without telling you how to fix it. They're not talking to you about the root cause of the world being bad, right? We tell you that patriarchy is a key reason that imperialist expansion happens, which makes the environment worse. A really good example here, judges, is that in Afghanistan, when the US went in there and created an occupation, they used burqa laws as a way to justify their occupation, which actually made the lives of women in that country worse and also worsened environmental degradation. In other words, patriarchy controls a lot of these issues, which tells you that the case is probably going to be prerequisite. Okay, on the social movement arguments and econ, at the end of the day, you're still going to be weighing the critique above these arguments because we agree that the world is bad. That's not what we're debating. What we're telling you is that in this round, debating whether or not the world is good or bad doesn't actually make any sense. We should be looking at the activist strategy to fix it. And you can cross-apply all their analysis about how we shouldn't just sit here and do nothing. We should actually try and come up with strategies to solve issues in the world. Okay, on the framework level, the first argument that they read to here is that like they deserve to survive, which is so true. We believe that Kieran Michelle deserves to survive. But what we tell you is that our strategy is specifically better for making sure that like gender minorities in the debate space are able to survive against patriarchy, because as my partner tells you, sexual assault and misconduct and like this drive to like create casual misogyny is what's pushing gender minorities out of debate right now. That means our critique and our activist strategy is a prerequisite to letting gender minorities survive in debate. Because if you vote for the other team, you're voting to uphold the status quo of debate as a whole. We tell you that only our critique has access to rupturing that patriarchy within debate, which means that our K is necessary to making sure that gender minorities survive. Even if you believe that their form of debate is good, no females or gender minorities are going to be left in the debate round if debate continues the way that it is. Voting for our K is a necessary step to rupture the pipeline that's pushing gender minorities out of the debate space, as my partner Abby tells you. Next, they try and tell you that we force non-men to adapt to our strategy, which is bad because they don't want to talk about how they're oppressed. We tell you that number one, you're going to prioritize our massive like rupture of the debate space, and that every time you vote for RK, you're basically endorsing our critique and creating like a better world for debate above like the issue of like certain people having to like adopt to it. But also say we're not making any gender minorities adopt to our strategy. We just read our strategy as a necessary thing that we should be doing. We ask them to engage with it by truth testing it, by telling us whether it's good or bad. That's what we want in this debate space. We're not trying to force them to join our movement or anything along those lines. We're just trying to normalize discussion of patriarchy as a prerequisite to make better activist strategies in the future. Finally, they tell you analyzing material conditions is key. We know the material conditions of the world, judges. The fact that these stats about like the environment have been out for decades probably tells you that there's no way that like their strategy solves for anything. So you're going to be extending that we are like better and that they're not really analyzing material conditions well, because the government has known this for forever and hasn't done anything to change it. On the impact level, just extend the proximal violence impact. We tell you that not only are people being pushed out of debate right now because of that, but also that it impacts people outside of the debate space, which means that it's the most proximal impact in the round. On the perm, okay, first you're going to extend the footnoting argument. We tell you that they literally don't get access to any of our epistemic rupture arguments. The perm co-opts our original argumentation, and if you vote for the affirmative, you lose the entire spotlighting impact of the alternative. You footnote gender minorities' experience of violent misogyny, so there's no actual advantage to doing the permutation. They reach you these disadvantages about co-option, but there's a turn because feminism right now is being co-opted in debate. There's a lot of white liberal feminism in debate that upholds Hillary Clinton as the paragon of feminism. We show that that isn't true, that our kind of critical feminism is a better form of feminism, and therefore we get out of the co-option disadvantage. They tell you education can be co-opted, but the CWLU is an example of education not being co-opted. That is what we do, judges. We create a normalization of anti-patriarchy education in the debate space, just like the CWLU liberation schools did. And then once people are against misogyny, we start engaging in material activist strategies like unions, like strikes. These are all reasons that you can't buy the permutation, because our advocacy is a key. Our survival strategy and speech act is the only way to create that epistemic rupture. So you can't access the positive impacts of the alternative without voting for us, the team that takes a risk on losing this ballot in order to make the debate space better for gender minorities. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. So if y'all are flowing this, I would suggest that you flow it on a separate sheet. But if you guys have a system for flowing already, feel free to do whatever works best for you. Okay, and Rihanna, as always, let me know if I missed anything. Okay, cool. Great. So if everybody's ready, my time will start now. Judges, the negation is fundamentally winning this round because we are the only team that sits down and takes the risk in this round to discuss how can we do better. We recognize the world sucks. We see this in our impacts level, we see this in our framework, and we see this in the affirmatives case. But we as the negation are the only team that actually gives you a strategy, an activist strategy, to join us in making this debate space like better. By voting us up, you're voting for a debate like the way that we do debate in a way that does not like as exclusionary to minorities. Okay, so with that being said, let's go and look at the key points of like offense in this round. Probably the most important thing to go and respond to first is this idea of like whether truth matters in comparison to proximal like violence as defined in our role of the ballot. Extend my partner Rihanna's like excellent analysis about how like we do not like, okay, sorry, extend my partner's excellent analysis about like how we see that the world sucks and the only way that we can fix it is by breaking down the way that patriarchy understands or shapes our understanding of the impacts of like the world sucking in the future. We see that to the point of like when they're arguing like we have to know our world in order to like check back against it, to the point where even their knowledge production, even the way that they talk about impacts actually does not actually center like the way center like this like contradiction that patriarchy causes. We see that this is probably really bad and makes it so that we can't actually do like good activism or make a good movement if our like knowledge of the world is based off of this, based within this patriarchal system. We see that in the next speech, they're probably going to come up here and say like, oh, like is 140 million people being displaced bad? But judge, we tell you, yeah, sure, it's bad. But what are we going to do about it if we don't understand that 140 million displaced people are going to disproportionately affect women? Like, how are we going to make a good solution if we continue to turn to institutions like the IMF that actually like do not take into account these like nuances and actually make like bad policy that is specifically worse for gender minorities? We see that this is key, and this is the reason why you have to be voting RK up first, because that is the only way we do good things. Secondly, we also see that we've known forever that climate change is killing us, but we haven't done anything about it. This means that there's actually no benefit for voting for them, because they don't actually afford anybody the opportunity to change anything. They're doing exactly what we have been doing in terms of ignoring climate change for like 60 years. It's probably like really bad. Okay, so this is why you have to be prioritizing our role of the ballot, our like decision to like figure out how to resolve these proximal like violence impacts of our role of the ballot over like the arguments about truth that they make. But okay, but judge, even if this doesn't matter, even if you think that case is important, we see that we know that all of the bad things in the world are happening. We see that their case gives you no activist strategy to oppose the bad things that are happening, so you literally cannot vote for them. They let gender minorities continue to leave the debate space because they don't rupture patriarchy. Also just extend the arguments that like our methodology is key to checking back to a lot of the problems that they're talking about, especially in their second contention about like how we're fostering like better ideology and better knowledge production is probably key to checking back against authoritarianism and like polarization. Okay, so let's go to this idea of like the perm debate. So here, this is probably the only place that they have offense really on the K, and there's like just extend the extend the arguments that my partner Rihanna makes here about like footnoting how our speech act is resistance. It lets us but the perm is essentially saying, okay, let us do like a round of bad debate that it like perpetuates like the violence within the debate space and then create revolution. That is literally how revolutions get squashed, and this means that the perm fails, and is why you should like vote against the perm. On the like part about like the DAs to the all, just extend like the fact that like the CWLU in terms of specifically the liberation schools and the way that they use the liberation schools to create material action is a unique reason why we won't be co-opted. Also just cross apply the fact that like we're creating like a space, like we're creating like solidarity within the debate space to like break this down, which probably means that co-option is probably not going to happen in the world of the app. We have to take the risk, essentially do like anything. Okay, so then the other argument to respond to is like this idea of like let us like resist however you want. Just cross apply and extend the fact that we like our material strategy does not rely on trauma dumping, but it is reliant on the fact that people are like engaging with it, like truth testing it and actually talking about it. It changes the way that like future debaters exist, and so to that end we see that this has to be prioritized. So at the end of the day, if you believe that we need material action against patriarchy in debate, you vote for us. Only by rupturing patriarchy through our speech act, which is not permeable, can you make the space more receptive to radical strategies. And so at the end of the day, the only side that you can vote for is the negation.
Okay. 5 minutes. Order is going to be just like an overview. Then I will go over the half and then I guess the egg. Okay, and then I'll do some weighing at the end. Okay. 5 minutes. My time will begin. Judges, everyone in this round agrees that there is oppression of women and non-men in debate and in society. This round comes down to a question of what is the best way we achieve liberation for these people in a way that is not exclusionary. My opponents have turned this debate into a model debate. So let's define what our model of debate is. The affirmative affirms a model of debate where non-men debaters are allowed to debate in and win rounds, both when they choose to read gender theory and when they choose to defend the topic. We argue that liberation doesn't solely occur when we're directly talking about patriarchy. We tell you that liberation can also come when a non-man debater enters the debate space, defends a topic, and people actually listen. Judge, if the only way we fight patriarchy is the only way we fight patriarchy is via combating it in all forms, allowing non-men to be empowered in the spaces when they're traditionally disempowered. Us defending the topic is us reclaiming traditional debate for non-men. I urge you to endorse a model.
Yeah, the argument that like them debating the topic is them reclaiming traditional debate and making it like good for gender minorities is new out of this speech. All our links in the LOC are indicting them for engaging in the topic. So it feels like new arguments that we're not able to respond to.
I mean, I do think we definitely read a significant number of arguments that said that like, that this is reclaiming the debate. Specifically, my partner's articulation that like defending the topic is being like reclaimed as a survival strategy for non-men was very clearly articulated, I think, throughout all of the MG. But it might just be like a wording issue, but this is just how I interpreted the argument to be. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm at like around 1 minute, so I'm going to continue. We argue that this model of liberation, this model that allows non-men agency to choose what they want to do and empower them regardless, is the best model of combating patriarchy, which is why you vote AF. But with that, let's look at what the AF does on a local level. We affirm the resolution. By doing so, 1, we isolate the problem. We tell you, judge, that we under the resolution analyze the material conditions of today and tomorrow. By doing so, we set up things such as movements as being able to face the material conditions, as being able to situate themselves in material conditions, and thus being able to like adapt, etc., to the like world that we exist in right now. This is the entire thesis of our demands argument. If we don't even understand the world we're in, we cannot do anything about it, which means that resolutional analysis, which we tell you in this round is specifically analyzing material conditions, is probably a prior question to being able to do any revolution. But second of all, we tell you that we, with an understanding of a problem, can then proceed to endorse advocacy movements. Judge, we do this through the perm. Specifically, we see that once we have this understanding of material conditions, which the resolution, like we necessarily do under the resolution, then and only then can we proceed to do things such as perm their advocacy movements. Can we like actually engage in advocacy and revolutionary movement building as the negation wants to forward. So we tell you that AF is a prerequisite to the neg in order to do this. With that, we tell you we probably pretty cleanly win that the AF, well, I guess, okay, with that, let's go on to 2 questions in today's debate. First of all, does the case layer matter? Judges, I tell you that it's probably a pretty clean yes as to why the case layer matters. My opponents have dropped one clear argument. They could weigh the entirety of their offense under the case layer. That probably means there's zero reason to prefer their role of the ballot in a world in which we already tell you that you can discuss gendered violence, you can discuss the history of gender movements and the future of gender movements while defending the resolution. You can argue that these movements are going to be propagated and brought up in the future, and that is going to be revolutionary. We tell you that if you can already defend all of your impacts under the world of defending the topic, there's no reason why your burden shouldn't be to prove the topic is going to be false. In doing so, we tell you the topic is probably going to matter a significant amount. We say that we clearly win under the topic because, again, you can extend all of the impacts of environmental degradation. People are going to lose their lives. Pandemics are going to be exacerbated. And yes, judges, this particularly affects minorities, as I pointed out from the beginning of the round. But second of all, we tell you it's probably going to lead to restrictions on civil liberties in the long term as authoritarianism increases and multipolarity challenges the US's world order, which only leads to significant increases in tensions, which is probably going to lead to devastating impacts in the future. On the case layer, it's probably pretty clear about AF. With that, let's go to the K layer. We tell you that K is not a question of whether patriarchy requires material action, but instead what is the best way to address material action with regards to the K. We tell you their critique falls short at one point, when it excludes voices who don't want to talk about their oppression 24/7. Judges, they forward a model of debate whereby debate becomes a forum for talking about gendered oppression. I asked them what they would do after the world of the alternative, and they just said that, oh, we're going to have discussions of gender. Judge, that is debate after this. All we do is talk about gendered oppression. We tell you that people who are oppressed under gender oppression don't always want to trauma dump. They don't always want to be forced to confront their terrible circumstances, which probably means this is very, very violent to them. Now, they tell you there's 2 reasons why the perm isn't going to work, like footnoting and that we don't have an advocate strategy. We tell you that we aren't footnoting. We are directly advocating for these movements, and it's better to combine the material conditions, not only because it decreases the likelihood of co-option, allows for a diversity of revolutionary strategies, and ensures that like we aren't actually just like excluding more voices, which means that we can probably do both at the same time. And they tell you that we aren't an advocacy strategy. Judges, at the point where we can perm their advocacy, say that we can do both at the same time, we're very clearly advocating for something. We're advocating for a world in which debaters, and specifically non-men debaters, have the agency to choose what type of debate they want to do, have the agency to stand up and take charge of the rounds and feel empowered regardless of what choice they make. Judges, this is a better world, which is why you vote AF.
Good rounds. Thanks, guys.
Oh, good round, you guys.
Okie doke. I think I was the last judge to submit my ballot. If that is correct for everyone. Cool. I guess, does anyone want to announce or should I do it? Okay, cool. Congratulations on making it to the semifinals of the Tournament of Champions. It's a super awesome achievement, and you all should be super proud. You know, again, it's not about like how many ballots you win; it's the friends you make along the way, right? But no, it's a super awesome achievement to get to semifinals, and you all should be very proud of getting there. That being said, this was a 3-2 decision from the affirmative from LAMV or MVLA. I don't know. Either way. But yeah, I sat. And so I guess the 2 squirrels will go first, and then the people who didn't sit can go after, if that's okay. Dope. So I think this was a killer round. This was super cool and exactly the type of debate I like to see. At the end of the debate, I end up voting for the negative from Nueva. I think that the negative is controlling global uniqueness on the epistemological layer of this debate that I think is sufficiently answered enough by the PMR to give me grounds to not grant that the method of the criticism is not able to solve itself or indict the epistemological production, knowledge production of the AF. On the framework level, the PMR tells me that if we don't understand the world right now, then we can't do anything about it, which is unfortunately exactly what the neg is telling me they're able to solve back for. I think that the block is winning that truth claims are overcoded by the patriarchy, accounting for the transmisogynistic violence that the K indicts. The PMR tells me that material actions are key to solving for these harms, but the block preempts this enough for me when they clearly extend that knowledge production and truth testing are a priori for being able to solve material actions anyways. I have PMR analysis about why material actions come first vis-a-vis the permutation, but I think absent an epistemology frame from the affirmative about why their method of calling truth to power in this, you know, I guess an extrapolation of what they're saying, I'm granting the negative that their method of epistemic rupture is a prior question to material movements. On the solvency layer, I'm almost sold on the permutation, but the PMR responses to the negative's truth claim that their method of epistemic rupture is not the resistance strategy that they're endorsing and rather it dooms it to fail through the perpetuation of transmisogynist violence by using the same episteme from the affirmative. I then look to the independent disads. But then I think that the block does enough for me to explain why the CWLU flows in their direction, that is discussions before material action. I think that the alternative as a method of solidarity probably makes these Ds a wash for me. I do think that the AF is winning case, but at the point that the K is controlling the internal link to truth testing as a whole, I'm not convinced by the PMR's framing of the AF as a method writ large due to the lacking of global uniqueness control from the affirmative. This means I end up voting for the alternative to solve for gendered violence in the debate space.
Yeah, that was I was the other person who voted for neg. You said it all in much bigger words than I use. I don't hear or judge many cases, but I thought this one was particularly suited for the topic. I think taking on patriarchy and gender and social identity, oppression and debate and challenging the lens we view this world as the strongest way to vote in this round. The gov move to turn the K doesn't make sense to me. If they say in the K, they say all people are forced to talk about gender norms and they can't choose. How does this change in the perm? I think overall the K is the best argued position in the round. The F has a good traditional case, but also gets pulled into arguing the K to the detriment of making their own case stronger. And I guess just to have my old woman moment, I debated in the late 80s. And when I came to online judging after I retired, it's like, well, I wonder if I'll understand any of it now. And it's exactly the same and it needs to change. So this is a really good round.
Thank you. Sorry, would the other judges mind giving RFDs as well, or are y'all like not want to do that? No worries either way.
I think we're all just shy. Let me see. So let me, I will do it. Just let me give me, I'm trying to find my little. Okay. So I voted F because I think government handled their topic and the ops revolution and quite adroitly took that missile and launched it right back at them. I thought the ops set up the topic debate. I thought the argument that to set up the topic debate for there to be a revolution actually makes the government's primacy, and I actually take that logical argument. The op does a good job of affirming the government's entire first argument to be entirely true. So as long as we know that like the gov's entire first argument is completely true and that's believed to be true, I think that the government took back agency. I think the government gave a voice to people who don't want to actually speak. And I think that's more clever than launching the revolution. And it actually turns it into something more productive within the space by addressing why we stay on topicality at the same time as addressing why the revolution is not a good thing. And I'm actually going to be also revolutionary and say that's it.
You can go next. Yeah, congrats everyone. It was a good round. I think that the K was pretty well presented, but I end up voting Gov for a couple reasons. The first of which I agree, the argument about like forcing people to like trauma dump and discuss this even when they don't want to is a good one, and ends up kind of biting into the solvency of the K, because like the world of debate as presented by each side, like I agree that with the government argumentation that when the world of debate only looks like every round is like discussing like gender in debate and how to solve for that, or maybe not, because this round didn't actually discuss that really. Like that does actually become exclusionary in itself and removes a lot of the value of exploration and the argumentation about like the time protection and the mechanism of debate creating space for like agency and exploration of like non-men debate, like setting boundaries, rejecting POIs, and creating that for themselves. I think that's a good argument, and that also bites into this like world of debate. My paradigm says there's a high bar for critiques to win, and I think this just simply didn't really meet it. I think the perm is fine. Like I kind of buy it enough to give me that wiggle room. Vote Gov. Yeah, like I buy the argument that case debate is key to crafting movements, and that like it's not actually a prerequisite to solving these issues, because you actually need to understand the world in order to have discussions about how to fix it. So I buy the argumentation. Yeah, there are a lot of other things on my in my RFD, but it just kind of came down to that. Also, I think that K debate generally requires me as a judge to like insert myself slightly more than I would on a normal case round. And I think that the way that panned out this time was just that the government arguments were more convincing.
Thank you.
So I, as you know, Nueva, I voted for this K in the last round, but I went the other way this time and voted for the Gov. And that was because I felt that in both instances, it really came down to the role of the ballot. And like who can best uplift gender minorities in debate, or who can best like make that space accessible. And I really buy when the government tells me that it is better and people are given more agency when they can choose whether or not to engage in case debate or critical debate, and that especially by engaging in case debate, they are essentially like reclaiming debate for themselves. So that was the first thing. What else? I think the perm is fine in the argument that we need to understand what we're talking about before we have any sort of movement. And also I found the idea that like kind of like forcing people to talk about these gender issues can also lead to forced outing, which is obviously a very big harm that we don't want in debate. I think that overall, I think that the K is really interesting and will definitely lead to a lot of conversation in debate. I just think that when government talks about issues of agency and access for gender minorities, that is fitting in line with the rhetoric of the K, and it's just another way of approaching debate. So yeah, great job all around. It was a really enjoyable debate to watch.
That's it.
Thank you all
We're
so
done.
much.